possibly everything I've believed is false. Everything I believe may have been given to me by someone else. It's their beliefs. And so I say I had the benefit of that because all my shit was called into question and I was willing to question it all. Now, a lot of people don't have an experience like that just cracks the egg and you have to start over. I had that experience. And to be fair, like people have that experience and like, fuck it, I just want to go back to the world I knew. For me, it's like, no, I did all the things. I'm unfulfilled. Something's not right. And the more I dug, the more answers I found, which led to more questions and just sitting in that inquiry. So I recognize and I hold space for my brothers when I share this information that they haven't had that moment that they're willing to question it all. They may question a few things here and there, but they're very selective, the safer ones. And, I've used some plant medicines with them to help get them to see that there's other stuff going on.
Welcome to the Worth the Fight podcast, where we bring you powerful conversations surrounding the sensible and therapeutic use of psychedelics and plant medicines towards healing trauma. I'll introduce you to guests who, through their own personal journey and transformation, tell the Worth the Fight story. I'm your host, Matt Simpson, author of Worth the Fight, Acting for a Better World, a guide to spirituality, psychedelic medicines, and overcoming trauma. Thank you for listening. Our next guest on the Worth the Fight podcast is Callahan, the host of the great Unlearn podcast. We are doing a part 2 as a follow-up podcast to our last episode when I was down in Austin, Texas. Had an incredible time with Cal, connecting with him. Very high vibe podcast conversation where we really pushed the edges. It was really inspiring to see Cal's set up a beautiful home in Austin, a beautiful studio, and was such a gracious host. In this episode, I had the privilege of interviewing and focusing more of the spotlight on Cal. And I've been really curious about Cal and his story. He also cut his teeth in Chicago, where I've lived for 16, 17 years in the corporate rat race. And he also escaped that world and has a servant's heart and is channeling all of his energy to serve and financial resources to serve others and to be to play his part in this collective awakening. Really inspiring, so much wisdom and pragmatic tips on how to be healthier, happier, and stronger. Cal is full of inspiration. He shares a recent awakening that he had of kind of reaching for his next level growth. And, I've been saying it for months now that quantum leaps are available right now with all this unsettled energy and all this heaviness of with everything that's going on in our world. And to see another, inspired soulfire podcaster doing incredible work, it was an honor to share his journey and his story. Without further ado, I give you the part 2 of my conversation with Callahan, host of the Great Unlearn podcast. Thanks so much for listening. I'm here with Callahan, the host of the Great Unlearn podcast. We are doing a part 2 to the podcast that we had a few weeks back when I was in Austin, in your beautiful studio, beautiful home. So much love and grace that I felt in your presence and in the presence of your family. So great to have you on the Worth the Fight podcast. Cal, how are you?
So good. And it was so awesome to have you here in Austin and that we were able to connect. And I'm grateful for Kelly and Connor for putting us together. And I mean, it's different doing it over Zoom, but it's a necessary, course of action given the way things are. But for us to be able to drop in together and for you to share that beautiful cacao ceremony. And I've been integrating that in, as I said I would. I've been integrating it into my practice as well. And so it was, you were like I said, you're fucking way taller than I thought you were. So that was pretty cool. The mountain of a man here.
My friends call me the Jolly Giant,
Yes, Jolly for sure too. Yeah, that was awesome. And Peyton really enjoyed spending time with you and my wife Peyton. So thank you, brother. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, absolutely. In the part one, we went deep into the veteran collective soul healing mission. We talked a lot about the Worth the Fight book. I'm really excited to unpack more of your journey and your experiences. You also were, spent your time cutting your teeth in Chicago. I did as well. I'm always fascinated to hear the story of how you're doing this heart-centered work, this soul work right now, with the podcast and this conscious messaging. You're out towards the edges, pushing forward and doing this important work. I'm always curious as to how do you do it? How do you escape the rat race? And I'd love to hear your thoughts and impressions on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, so like you, I was in Chicago. I was there for 18 years. I was a trader. I was a partner at a trading firm. And really just an amazing group of people that I worked with. My kind of the founding partner of the firm, Will Hobart, just really set the tone for what that family was all about, which I'm super grateful for, because in that industry, like most, it's a mixed bag, especially in trading. You can get in with some unsavory characters without even knowing. You're like, fuck, I just want a job and this sounds great. And so you say yes. And it was the only job offer I got. And so I didn't really have no in my back pocket, but I wouldn't have anyway, right? I just had a real deep connection with Will from our first interview. And so I spent, 18 years, but really the last, I don't even know, I tried to remember, it was like the last 18 months, or it wasn't feeling right. And as a partner, I felt like a fraud, because this notion, I was almost hiding, because I wasn't called to that work anymore. And I had done really well. And at the same time, I got really into fitness, got into CrossFit, I got into nutrition, I got into life coaching. So I was doing all of that work through my own experience to experiment with it. But I was also taking courses from, a longtime brother now, James Fitzgerald, who owns OPEX Fitness, and he's been on my podcast a couple of times. And, through his guidance was really able to identify, like, it's just time to move on, and I think, I don't know if I had mentioned this before, but I was reading David Data's Way of a Superior Man, and I hit it's chapter 12, and I always forget exactly what the content is, but it's, if you're doing something and you could leave it today and have no regrets without completing the project, and it was all kind of iterations of that same theme, his recommendations, it's time to leave that project. And for me, it was time to leave that job. And it was the only job I'd ever had out of college. I had helped build this firm to just a few of us to, I don't know, we had 60, 70 employees. And, not all traders. We had a lot of people in the back office, but it was a really tight family. And so when I read that, I was at a coffee shop on a Sunday in Chicago, my favorite coffee shop called Star Lounge, and drinking dark matter coffee. And I literally start crying, because I knew it's what I had to do. And I knew it was the end of that chapter. And that chapter was, you can imagine, right? At that point, I was 40, 41. I'd spent so many of those important years with this group, growing up with this group. And I think I felt I definitely felt a sense of relief, like, oh, I'm not a bad partner. I'm not a bad, person. It was just time for me to leave. And it's been time for me to leave. This course of my life is over. This chapter is over, and it's time for something new. And so then I got into the coaching and training, and it's all I was spending my time with. Really, the last couple of years of trading, whenever I could get time to look on my phone when it was slow in the trading pit, I was reading all I could to get information. So I went on that bit of a journey, and that felt very natural to me, because even as a trader, I always had this sense of being a mentor, whether it was new traders coming into our firm and training them, or frankly, people that I stood around in the trading pit, young guys who were my competition, arguably, but I always had this sense of like sharing what I knew. It doesn't mean that I was, handing out dollar bills, but I am competitive, was competitive. I could definitely be a dick too and intimidate, but there's always this sense that felt better when I connected with these other, most of them were men, these other men, and shared that. It felt like an act of service that was just the right thing to do. Like there was, and I think we were talking offline about this sense of abundance. And I think I was able to do that with an open heart because I've always had this abundant mindset. I just didn't know that's what it was until quite recently. And that's why I never felt bad about sharing in trades, which would enrich them. Right. But I also knew that if you're a good person, you do the right thing, like that's just the good flow of energy. And I didn't have any of that language back then. I just knew for me, it felt like the right thing to do. And it's because I didn't have the scarcity mindset, like, oh, I need to take all this trade because I don't know if there's going to be another one. Like that, just that thought that just constricts you and armors you up. And being a coach and really working with people to help them identify what their needs are was awesome for me. It was a great outlet.
How long have you been coaching? How long have you, just out of curiosity? I want to get the time frames.
Yeah. So 2013 is when I left trading.
Okay.
Yeah. So 2013 is when I started coaching. And it was really around fitness, and I would bring in some nutrition, and then there was the life coaching. The life coaching is really what, really made me feel alive. I could write out the reps and sets, and I was really good at that, but it was arduous. Mm-hmm. To be really good at that, you have to put in the hours, and then it just comes like second nature. And I never got to the point because I never had enough clients where that's all I was doing, which was good, I think, because I'm glad that I never stayed in that space. And I kind of moved on from that quite quickly in 2014 to the Phoenix rise of the National Pro Fitness League originally. Then it was called the National Pro Grid League. And I owned and ran that team with James Fitzgerald. And I took care of all the kind of administrative business side of it. And James took care of all the athletes. And so that felt amazing until, within the first year, it felt like it wasn't going to work because the league went really big and just didn't have the funding. And so it was like a scaling back. It went on for 2 more seasons and then it shut down. And so that was really over the course of a little more than 2 years. It was 3 seasons, but the way it laid out was a little over 2 years.
Cleared up that was you cleared up that space so you could follow a passion project. And so few people do that. So many people are stuck and they, are void of purpose and meaning and void of the autonomy and the freedom to go for experiences like that. And I just want to honor your courage and bravery for recognizing, hey, as 18 years, this is a chapter that has to close. So few will ever close that chapter and do that to clear that space.
Yeah. And it's just, it's listening to what your heart telling you, not what everybody else is, not what your mind is trying to rationalize and say, well, geez, I could still make a lot of money here. And maybe that was true, but I actually didn't get the sense that was going to happen. So that made it a little easier. The last 2 years I was trading, we didn't have great years as a firm. The business on the whole was kind of suffering through that period. So like, why am I doing this? Like I made more than an amount of money that I never thought I could ever make. And so that I kind of checked that box. And I've always been one to I just want to try new things and not follow another's playbook. I will look at other people's playbooks to see what's interesting, but I always felt this sense I'm just going to do whatever I want. And that was really embodying that. And when I came to Austin, so we moved to Austin in 2013, as I got out of trading, I had this notion. I told a lot of people I was going to open up a training facility. I was going to coach people. I was going to have, that, and just had this big vision for it. And I kept getting stalled on it. And what it was, Matt, was I just wasn't clear on what the path looked like. And I thought my only framework really was coaching in a facility. But I had so much heartburn around. I was like, fuck, I spent 18 years created all this financial freedom. And now I'm going to go put myself in a situation that requires so many hours of my time with a very small chance of financial success in that space, or it's certainly nothing compared to what I had experienced. So I had to weigh that too, like, well, why am I doing this? And I had a mentor who said, look, just because you said you were going to do it doesn't mean you have to do it. Like, it's just part of like your figuring it out. And so literally that gave me permission to move on from it.
Yeah.
And as soon as I did that, the opportunity for the Grid League, appeared because I was open to it. And like I said, I pursued that, and that finished in the fall of 2016. And frankly, it was hard for me because I spent a lot of money. I invested a lot of money into that team and that project, and it was all gone. I said, fuck, man, like, you didn't do your due diligence. Just like my best friend attorney is like, dude, why are you doing this? This is like a pipe dream. I know he's got this great deck that he's showing you, but it's like, there's no way this can happen. I've seen a million of these deals. And I'm like, I don't care. I have to do it. This is what I'm called to. And I took that to heart. And whenever people would ask me about the Grid League and how it was going, I was like, well, it's on hold right now, or it's folded. And I learned a lot, but I hadn't learned anything at that point because I felt all that sense of guilt and shame about what I didn't do. And I hadn't realized that that was such an important part of my journey, because I had so much fun, aside from some of the business stuff that was a little sticky. I had so much fun with the team and the other owners, and just in that community, that it brought out the kid in me. I mean, if you saw videos of me, I mean, I'm sitting there in my suit on the side, on the side in the front row, right? Because we get the front row. Not that there were many rows at these matches, but I mean, I'm fucking running down the side. Like, I couldn't help myself. And I realized now that there was nothing to help. Like, there's nothing to restrain. I was in that just childlike excitement, and I went with it, and I was given permission to do that. And it took me a long time. And in fact, talking about it right now is the first time that I really made that connection of that child in me. Because as we were saying, before we got on, like, I've really tapped into that. What I realized a couple of years ago, this is 3 years post the experience, was actually a year ago. Oh, it wasn't about the financial investment. This was about me feeling alive. And now I've taken it a step further. It's like, this is awakening that child in me. And that's what it did for me. And now it's my orientation to everything.
I love it. I see it. I feel it. I see the picture of the Dalai Lama right now in a hood behind you, in a hoodie and a mohawk. You're sporting the same mohawk. And
That's right.
And I love that spirit, that playful spirit.
Well, and if you look next to the Dalai Lama, can you recognize who that is? You probably can't, but you might be able to guess who that is.
I can't see it on the picture here.
No, it's right there. It's me as a child.
Oh, beautiful.
And so recently I put him on my altar. I had him on my altar originally, but it was small and it was getting crowded. So I kind of moved that picture. And then as over the past couple of weeks, when I really connected to that inner child and that healed inner child, right? Not the wounded one, the healed. And I'm not saying I'm not connected to the wounded version. Like, he needs so much love, but I had given him so much love over the past 3 years that he's been healed. And now he's up there with a bright smile on his face on my altar, as a reminder that everything that I do, it needs to go through that filter. Does this bring me joy? Am I having fun? Then okay, then I will pursue this, or I will at least open up to pursuing it. But if it does not bring out joy in me, fuck no, I'm out.
Love it.
Yeah.
Beautiful making that commitment, holding that line. Surely that emotion of joy, that spirit of joy is contagious. And are you feeling that with I felt that with the Great Unlearn podcast. You're certainly feeling that and embodying that spirit.
Yeah. And I would say, like, again, we were together 3 weeks ago, I think, maybe. it's a completely different level that I've ever experienced of joy. And so the podcast, yes, like there was definitely a level of joy, and that's why I've been doing it. I've recognized there are other reasons why I've done it as well, which are all part of my own school that I've been setting up from a higher kind of self kind of perspective. But now, like I would prepare, right? You prepare for your podcast and you do that. I just sat down and did about an hour and a half solo cast that I had written down some notes of like things I didn't want to miss talking about, but there was no prep. It's all coming through without thinking. It's all from the heart.
Mm.
And I feel that right now with the podcast, that there's very little prep, because I'm just going in and just like really that curious and wonder of what is my guest like, what is it about this guest that I want to know, and just be in that space. And I'm just like so excited. I just know, and I kind of, I talked about it on the podcast, but 2020 for me with the podcast was preseason. Like I'm launching
Love
in
that.
2021. It's like it's the regular season, which does presuppose there will be playoffs, and they might be happening sooner than I think. But I'm just like so excited. And in like the course of what I'm really following, like what am I interested in? And with that, I'm not, I'd say I've put out some content recently that has been hard for some people. Dr. Thomas Cowan, who really flips germ theory on its head, talks about what's going on with the lockdowns, COVID, and it's just not the common narrative. And so I'm like, yeah, like I've been studying his work for the last couple of years. It was amazing to have him on. But now it's like time for me to really step into that and really investigate those things that I'm learning, and not worrying about who it's triggering. Because if it's triggering you, that's information for you. That's something you can't accept what's coming. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with it. But if you can't just accept that someone has a different viewpoint, is that really how you want to go through your life?
Yeah.
And I've been triggered plenty in my life, and it fucking sucks. It makes me stay up in the head and try to prove that I'm right. And I don't care about that anymore. I literally don't. And I'm not just going to put stuff out there to trigger people. I want to be very clear about that. But this is stuff that is very important to me. And I need to be very honest about that and speak my truth around that. And that's what's been happening. I've been showing up more on social media, like Instagram in particular, just being like, fuck, like Plandemic, right? Movie that I think is the most important movie of 2020. And I've told my best friends about it.
I haven't seen
Yeah,
it yet.
it's it just lays everything out. And the Mickey Willis is the guy behind it. And he actually they just recut some stuff. They're putting out a new version, kind of updated with some new information, which is going to be amazing. But I've told people about it. I've told my best friends about it. You need to watch this. We're having conversations about what's going on, but they haven't watched. I'm like, I'm done having these conversations. And so you do the work to educate yourself on some of the stuff I've seen, because I've heard and read all the stuff you're talking about. You say that I'm someone you trust. They're the ones who gave me that the Dalai Lama. They're like, you're in a very sweet way. They're like, we kind of see you this way. You're like our spiritual kind of going out and doing the work and sharing with us. And that's why with the Mohawk and everything, it was perfect, right? So they actually call it the Kali Lama, right?
Cali
So
Lama. Love it.
It's so fun. But I'm like, you motherfuckers haven't watched the movie yet. Why? What are you afraid of? I'm as close to you as anybody, and I'm telling you to watch this movie. Dr. Cowan's work. They haven't fucking read a book of his.
Well, I listened to your podcast, Dr. Cowan. It was spot on, powerful. There are a lot of thought-provoking aspects. I've heard Kelly Brogan's angle on this as well, and it's a lot to sit with. It is triggering. It creates massive dissonance when we think about some of the systems that are, I believe, in the process of being overhauled. And but it's a lot, and we're all busy and like playing devil's advocate, we're all busy, we're all trying to keep up, you know, the economic struggles of with what's going on in the world right now, the heaviness. And I know from my experience in the past that there's certain things that I don't want to go near because it will create that dissonance and it's going to fuck with my focus and like trying to get my work done. And it's only so much that you can bring in. I think it's very brave of you to broach some of these topics and to put out this honest, contrarian content. That's the very tenet, the very basis of America is free speech and free expression. And I just want to honor.
And that's getting crushed right now. If you watch Social Dilemma, talks about it, Mickey talks about it in Pandemic, and that's my problem with the whole thing. It's like, look, I'm giving you something that's different than the mainstream, not because it's conspiracy theory or any of that bullshit, but you're reading CNN, you're reading Fox, you're reading articles. These entities do not have your best interest in mind at all. It's all clear. And then the social media with Twitter and Facebook, how they are just, everything is getting, they're letting you see exactly what they want you to see. And the more you see that, the more it trains you to see these things and believe them. So what I'm saying is like, okay, you want to read that? Fine. I'm giving you an hour and 15-minute movie. Take your time and watch this because it's against what you're drinking in right now. And it explains exactly what you're drinking in. Now, I had the benefit, and I please, anyone listening, like, don't misunderstand that I'd be happy that this happened, but I was in Las Vegas in 2017 at the mass shooting. Mm-hmm. I was at the concert, Jason Aldean show. I was with a group of people that were hiding behind tour buses as he was shooting. In that moment, in the weeks, months following, everything I believe got called into question. And it was because, you know, the best I can tell, I was in a situation with one of my best friends. You know, we were hiding from the gunfire. And it was very surreal, but it was actually very real at the same time. And I had this thought, I don't know how many people are firing guns. I don't know if it's a terrorist attack. I don't know if they're trying to kill everybody at this concert. Someone could come around these tour buses and there's nothing we could do. And so in that moment, all the tools I had, all the coping mechanisms, all the ways I dealt with fear, trauma, something that didn't feel right, they didn't work. And I was helpless. And in that moment, I surrendered. I just surrendered my life. And the way that came about was I wasn't scared. And if you know me, that's not necessarily my orientation to stuff like that. Like anybody I think would be scared from gun. Like it wasn't about the gun. It was just that I realized that there was nothing I could do. And I wasn't necessarily okay with it, but like I said, I surrendered. And I also had this notion, you know, as I mentioned, I was a trader. I did really well. I have an amazing wife. I have 3 kids. I have everything I've ever wanted. And I was completely unfulfilled. And so when I was able to get out of that situation, I went on a deep existential inquiry of like, why am I here? Why am I here? And as I started to go down that road, it's like, I had this knowing that possibly everything I've believed is false. Everything I believe may have been given to me by someone else. It's their beliefs. And so I say I had the benefit of that because all my shit was called into question and I was willing to question it all. Now, a lot of people don't have an experience like that just cracks the egg and you have to start over. I had that experience. And to be fair, like people have that experience and like, fuck it, I just want to go back to the world I knew. For me, it's like, no, I did all the things. I'm unfulfilled. Something's not right. And the more I dug, the more answers I found, which led to more questions and just sitting in that inquiry. And so I recognize and I hold space for my brothers when I share this information that they haven't had that moment that they're willing to question it all. They may question a few things here and there, but but they're very selective, the safer ones. And, I've used some plant medicines with them to help get them to see that there's other stuff going on. As you know, you've done a lot of work with that stuff. And so I hold space for that. But at the same time, the human part of me is like fucking frustrated. Like, when you say you trust me, but it's not aligning. You haven't even listened to my podcast with Dr. fucking Cowan. Like, you know how important that guy is to the work that I've done. Where's the fear coming from? And so it's, kind of a long way to say I understand the triggers, but I just invite everyone to sit with those triggers and investigate them. Why am I triggered? And if I have a different opinion from you, if you're a Trump supporter and I'm a Biden supporter, can we just be like that? Can we just own that we have different feelings about this based on our own direct life experience? Or do I have to hate you and you hate me and not listen to anything we say? I'm not saying I'm trying to convince one another of the other's policies or any of that. I'm just saying, why can't we hold space for one another and just listen? And that's what we're seeing. At every turn, there are people who are pulling a lot of levers that are creating more and more division. And it's just to separate everyone. And when they do that, we police ourselves. We call each other out. We bury each other online, and they don't have to do the dirty work anymore. They just keep throwing the little bombs out there, and everybody chooses sides. And I'm done with that, So again, the human side of me is like, what the fuck, guys? Like, when are you gonna wake up? Because I'm doing the work, and I'm doing the work, and it's coming from my heart. So where's the fear? And sit with that, investigate that. So
yeah, so much goodness to unpack there. Thank you for the vulnerable share about the traumatic experience in 2017, the shooting. I'd imagine that or I can understand how that would inform a lot of who you are and the path that you're on. And what was alive for me was this idea that's an NDE, that's a near-death experience, that's a full-fledged
100%.
And there's a lot of research that those near-death experiences, they rewire our brain for the better, and they call into question everything. And that is a true blessing to have shifted in this short amount of time, to shifted your frame on that, to look at that, and to channel this energy in the direction of service, in the direction of putting out the Great Unlearn podcast, which the very basis, correct me if I'm wrong, is to question everything.
It is.
And so walking the talk, and you're doing it, and I sense a little frustration with your tribe, your friends, your close loved ones, and I feel that too. It's like, well, wake the fuck up. Right now we're in a really hairy time, and we need all hands on deck right now. And
it's not like I'm telling them what to do. Like, I used to coach like that, but it's like, here's information, and it's not being received, right? And it's like, that's the frustration. It's not like, I want to be clear that I'm not telling them, I'm offering them resources that I've vetted as best as I can vet, right? So this feels like there's some truth in it. I think you should look at it. And it's just, again, it's frustrating because I just know it doesn't, like, we have the same conversations on text, and I just won't engage in it anymore. I'm triggered about this. It's like, yeah, because you haven't read or watched anything I've sent you. So I'm not talking about someone, who wrote a shit article just to trigger you. It worked, and so that's where I get frustrated. And again, this is something I have not owned in the past. And, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but people have these near-death experiences. People have these things that are there to shake them up, and they don't go into it. And I've always downplayed what my role in that was, right? Leaving trading. I said, yeah, but I was, we were losing, I wasn't making any money and this and that. I always made excuses of why it was easy for me to do it. And frankly, it was an easy decision, but I understand that it's difficult for people. So I want to honor that and not just assume that if someone goes through that, that their life's going to change. You still have to be intent. You still have to take on all the criticism of the people around you who may be coming from a loving space, but they're scared because you're changing. You don't know why you're changing. You don't know why you're going down these rabbit holes. But for me, it was like on the search of my truth, and I couldn't explain it. And it was really hard for my wife for a long time. She's like, am I losing you? Like, what's going on with you? You're like so focused on this. And my buddies were worried, oh, you're doing plant medicines. You're hanging out with people who are in polyamorous open relationships. Like, what's going on with you? And it's like, these people have a lot to offer. I'm not saying I'm going to start, opening up our relationship. We haven't, just for the record, if anyone's curious, but I'm curious. There's medicine there. There's medicine everywhere if you choose to look at that. But if you see somebody who is in an open relationship or someone who uses psychedelics or whatever the thing is that you're no, and you just shut off the rest of their medicine, you're only doing yourself a disservice. And I've never been like that. And that's not true. There have been times where I was like, fuck that guy for sure. But I've also been able to be discerning enough to say, just because someone is doing something doesn't mean I have to do all the things they do. If I'm curious about plant medicines, it doesn't mean I have to start trying to figure out how to bring women into our relationship. And people don't understand there's a level of discernment. They just see me as like, dude, you just kind of like go do all these things, and they don't see the discernment. And to be fair, I'm much more discerning than I was in the past. But what happens is, right, they go on the old version who hasn't had the insights and the learning, and they haven't spent the time, so they just make assumptions that, oh, you're in trouble, you're fucking losing your way. It's like, no, I've actually found my way, and this is my way. And if it makes you uncomfortable, I won't apologize for it, but I'll ask you to sit with what's making you uncomfortable, because I'm going without knowing, but there's something there, and it's not something I'm thinking about. I'm just following my heart, my gut, whatever you want to call that space, and I'm letting it direct me.
Beautiful. The heart knows, and I feel intuitively that you are on pushing out towards the edges of the new paradigm. There's a lot of unsustainability in the world that we have right now, and there's a lot of heavy energy. I think that we're in a time where rapid change, accelerated growth and change can happen. Quantum leaps can happen, and I'm hearing, and these triggers are there's potential. I know on my journey, I've reframed the triggers, and I think this is an invitation to everyone who, when they're absorbing content that makes them feel uncomfortable, is to ask questions and to get curious and to lean into that, and to look at those triggers as an opportunity. As teachers, really, everything's a lesson, and there's an immense amount of teaching that these things can do. Is like, well, why does that make me feel uncomfortable? Why is there this feeling in my gut? And the idea that you don't have to have it all gobbled up and to make sense of everything. I believe that all that, and this is, and when I work with the clients that I coach, all we have to do is we have to lean in and give our best effort each day. And there's a huge mystery here. With so much of what's going on in the world, and it brings us to the idea of like, well, what are we doing here? Where the fuck did we come from? Where do we go? And how come nobody's talking about it? And there's a lot of these things that make people feel uncomfortable. And I applaud you leaning in and putting out whatever's on your heart. And we're in a time where people have to share, and surely you're inspiring others to do the same. And I think that's the model. And
Yeah, and I would say, even with the triggers, you're 100% right. This is just information. It's like when you look on Instagram and that one friend of yours who may not even be a friend, but you follow them, triggers you every time. What is it about that post, that image, that makes you feel like you're not enough? Because that's what it comes down to. It triggers something in the wounding that you are experiencing. and don't, I would even say just sit with it and just pay attention. Don't try to answer it. Don't try to figure it out rationally. Just continue to pay attention to these things. And all of a sudden you'll see a common thread. And it's like, oh, I just don't feel like I'm lovable, or there's any number of kind of fill in the blank, but it's there for you to heal yourself. And so don't get off social media, but also don't get sucked in. If it's just a time suck, well, what's that all about? That's interesting. But what if being on there is part of your school, part of your triggers that show up? Pay attention to those things, those people that trigger you. Why does she trigger me? What is it about my wife when she says this thing that makes me want to crawl into a hole and not say anything and hide? That's not 49-year-old Cal. That's 7-year-old wounded John who didn't know how to, and I say John, that's my real name is John, but everybody calls me Cal. We may get into that later, but that's what that is. That's that wounding that hurts, and we don't know how to face it because we do have whatever it is, shame, guilt, whatever those lower energies are that were given to us most likely by, in a lot of cases, our parents, because they were wounded and they were doing the best they could, but all they knew what to do. I mean, they parented or whatever, but they passed on that wounding to you through their language and the way they were around you and the way they were around other people. We're so attuned from, birth until 7. We're picking up on all this stuff, and it creates this wounding. And the wounding is an opportunity to heal. You heal the wounding, you become the wounded healer, and you get to share that medicine with others. And even as it doesn't have to be fully healed, as it's starting to heal, you get to share that. And that is, for me, that's the best medicine. Don't tell me something you read in a book about fucking whatever. I want to know about your experience, about the thing you're talking about, because if you had an experience and you've come through it the other side, you've got me. I'm listening, But if you're telling me something you read from a book about some guy who had an awakening, well, it's okay. I'm curious about it maybe, but you're not teaching me anything because there's no resonance there. I want to know about you and what's happening on a soul level for you. Like, what's changing for you? What have you learned through experience, not through school or podcasts or anything else? Whatever, like I always try to say on my podcast, like, whatever you gather from our conversation, right, Matt? Whatever you gather from our conversation, go out and apply that to your life. Don't take that as a truth, because that is my truth. This is your truth. And we're sharing that as a way, I would say, to inspire others to say, like, look, go have the experience and then find your truth, because it's going to be different than mine.
Love that non-dogmatic spirit. And I think that is so imperative right now. So many of us are healing from dogma, and to find what works for you and just fucking go do that. And the degree to which we lean in to our pain, our traumas, the adversity in our life, the darkness, I believe, is the very same degree to which we can stand and share and love our light. And so many people are reluctant to lean into their shadow. How do you've mentioned this a recent awakening that you had. You mentioned the 7-year-old Cal, or the 7-year-old John.
Nice, yeah.
And how do you, or what would you advise for people what are your practices, or what works for you to confront those hurts and to address and to process those emotions? I think when we process those emotions, we clear that energetic space for light and love and joy and these things to come forth. But what would you recommend as a practice, or what have you seen?
Yeah, so pay attention to podcasts, right? What are people doing? Some people are using psychedelics intentionally. Some people are really into breath work. Some people like to do the cold plunge in the sauna, and they like to work out, and they like to be outside with bare feet in the grass and be in the sun. There are any number of things that you can do try them out and see what works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean it's not going to work for you in 3 months, 6 months, a year. Just continue to find out what your path is and continue to be curious, and don't feel like you need to tell anybody what you're doing, because when you start to put language around it, it loses the force and the energy of what you're doing. You're just curious. You're like, for me, it's like, I want to know why I'm here. It can't be for what I thought it was. And as I went into these different practices and hosting men's groups and being around other people and opening up and being vulnerable and starting to, like, all these things start to free you layer by layer by layer. Using astrology, I've used that a lot. I've used human design, Akashic record readings. I've used readings from channels in Sedona. I've tried a lot of things, and it's not any one thing. It's like, keep trying them. And if they're working, keep playing with them. The podcast has been a great way for me to have these deep conversations, intentional conversations, right? Matt, you and I wouldn't be talking today if you didn't have this podcast. And here we are, in my opinion, having an amazing conversation and connection because of the podcast. And so that's what I love about the podcast. Yes, I'm happy to serve others by sharing content, which I think is important. But the podcast for me is a way to sit down with someone that I'm really curious about, right? And then it's also, the other thing that I realized is it's made me a much better listener. You know, as a host, you've got to be attuned. You've got to be present to what I'm saying so that, you know, this is a good flow of a conversation. What happened to me is I've always thought I was a pretty good listener. Being a podcast host just changed the game for me. Now, when I have conversations with people outside the podcast, I'm there. I'm right with you the entire time. I didn't have that ability, but the podcast taught me that. That was part of my school, right? And so use these practices in this is such an important part. Like, listen to this one. Don't try to find the thing. Don't try to heal that wounded child. Don't try to do that. Just do the work. Stay present in whatever the modality is, meditation, whatever. Stay present with it, right? For me, one of the tools that I use that was so helpful, I think I shared this with you before, is the use of ketamine. And using that with intention, and every now and then have some fun with it. Like, I'm fucking human, right? But a lot of times it was like diving deep into why am I here? And it would clear my lens about all the shit that was going on in my head. I would kind of leave my kind of consciousness, and I could just tap into this greater knowing. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't have to explain it because I knew something was changing in me. Something was changing. So don't go find that wounded child and heal him or her. It'll never happen. Just stay present in whatever your practices are. And one day, like me, which happened recently, and I can't say there's a particular day where I felt it, but everything started changing. I saw the whole world differently. I no longer had the triggers, or I would feel something start to want to pull that trigger, and I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm just taking that personally. That's not my shit, right? Oh, I'm just making an assumption here. I'm not being clear with my word, right? And I'm obviously referencing the 4 agreements here, but I've done that now. I don't have to think about like, oh, I'm triggered by this. Oh, I'm just taking what my wife said personally, or I think my wife's mad at me right now. I'm making an assumption she's mad at me. I no longer do that. I just see beyond that. I don't have to tell myself, I just feel it. And like I was telling you earlier, when I communicate now, whether it's in person, via text, or email, it's way shorter than it used to be. And I say exactly what I mean. And that's only available to me now because, as we were talking about again before we got on, I have owned my what I would argue my superpower. Everyone has their superpower or superpowers. My superpower is my ability to gather resources, to create. I have this abundance that I don't feel scarcity. And in owning that abundance and not having the shame and the guilt that I've had for 49 fucking years around that, letting go of that allowed me to set boundaries that I have never, ever been able to do, because I would donate to things because I felt, oh, like I've got more than enough. Like I need to give some, who I don't deserve all this. I didn't feel like I deserved all the financial abundance or even the abundance of time that I had when I left trading and I had all this time. I would give away my time to people that honestly didn't deserve it, but I felt guilty. They asked, I'm not really working. I don't have a really good excuse. And I know now, I know my no. And if having coffee with you is not going to bring me joy, it's a no. And I'm not going to be a dick about it, but I'm going to be very clear. And if it's hard for you, that's your work to do. But what I found is, fuck, man, people really appreciate me being clear.
Yeah.
And now they know where they stand. And I have more respect for them and love for them because they are able to recognize that. And, you know, it's a fucking rabbit hole, which I spent an hour and a half kind of unpacking this recent awakening. But I'm telling you, one of the things I talked about for years, you know, I'm a guy who takes care of himself. I eat really well. I sleep 8-9 hours. I usually don't set an alarm. Like I'm just really attuned to that. That feels really good for me. I take a nap when I'm tired. I don't feel judgment around that shit. It's been more than 2 weeks. I said to my partner, I said, Ty, oh fuck, man, like I like nighttime comes around and I'm a little bit bummed. Like I don't want to go to sleep. Like sleep is in the way of the next day. So I'm like, I just want to go to sleep and wake up and just start the day. And I swear to God, I told him that one day. And then I haven't had a full night's rest with the exception of one night. I went to bed. It was when I had come back from LA. I slept 8 hours straight. Aside from that, I've woken up after 3 hours to go to the bathroom and I'm wide awake and I just get up. And one time I went up and check on my boys. It was 2 a.m. My 2 boys are upstairs in their area. My 14-year-old loves to play video games. I'm like, I can't find his phone. Like, let's go see if he's on it. Like, what's going on? I go upstairs, knock on his door. It's locked. I don't know how to fucking pick his lock. My wife does. It's like, whatever. Okay, I'm just going to assume he's asleep. I start folding some laundry up there. They get a laundry room. And meanwhile, I had made a cup of coffee because I'm like, I'm up. I'm just, the day's starting. And I look and my 17-year-old is still up. See his light on and I knock on his door. He and I have like the most amazing conversation at 2 a.m. for 45 minutes, talking about colleges and just being really open, really connecting. And then what happens? The door opens and my 14-year-old comes out. And for 30 minutes, the three of us just hang. It's fucking almost 3:30 in the morning. And finally, I'm like, okay, it's time to go to bed. You guys go to bed. I come downstairs, you know, I can't really sleep. So I put on an audio book, listen for 30 minutes. I fall asleep around 4. I wake up at 5:15 and it's like the day is starting. These are the days I'm having and I haven't napped yet. And, you know, we talked about it before, but for 2 years, I've been microdosing with LSD mostly and some psilocybin 2-3 times a week. I love those days. Whenever I podcast, I do it. It just gets me centered. It gets me really open-hearted, focused, energy. It's all the things that you've talked about on your podcast. I'm done. I stopped 8 days ago because the level I was operating at, which was something I had never touched before, I'm operating above it at all times right now. And that's what's like fucking blowing my mind. Like I'm not called to that anymore. I was, for about a month, I was using, you know, I have a prescription for ketamine. I was using it a fair amount. And at one point, probably after 2 weeks of a little more than heavier use, I'm like, I need to stop to make sure that like, am I becoming addicted to this? Like this feels like I'm being pulled into this thing. It took a couple of days off, started up again, and actually went in harder. Because what I found out was, and I haven't touched that in 8 days either. No judgment around it, because it's not like I'm done with it. I mean, there's zero. Like those have been incredible resources for me, but I was on the edge. I was on the brink of something, and I kept going into the space. And I feel like I finally popped through, and it's like, that's it. And not that I could explain what it is, but I just knew I didn't need it right now as a tool, to the point where if you've ever used ketamine, like when you use it and you kind of re-up and re-up, it stacks, it amplifies. It doesn't lessen with like booze or pot where you get it's that kind of effect. The last day I used it, I took like a pretty good whack, like a ceremonial dose, not a social dose. And it barely hit me. It's like, holy shit, like it can't touch where I'm operating right now. And that was a fucking aha moment for me. Like, oh, this is all changed. Like this is a completely different orientation to my entire life. We've, again, I'm up 18 to 20 hours every day without anything. I mean, I have coffee in the morning, but I drink the coffee because I like the process of it. It doesn't, sometimes it immediately takes me down a level because it's just, I'm just like fucking on fire right now. And I, on the one hand, I can't help it. On the other hand, I'm not going to help it. And I'm working on like, you know, I referred to it as like kind of like waking up one day with this superpower and like learning to work with it. So I am intent on really using it for the highest good for me and for all, but I'm letting that child play. Because to me, this is all play. You know, when I would come on a podcast, I'd be like, okay, what am I going to say? Like kind of maybe have a little bit of jitters or whatever. Like this one, I'm just like, I'm so excited to talk and share. And so let me get into the John piece, because it's a very important part of this whole thing. I've identified as Cal ever since college. And when I would be referred to as John, it would just feel weird. It's like, like, and I didn't know where it came from necessarily, but I just knew there was something about it I didn't like. So when people call me John, I'm like, yeah, everybody calls me Cal, you know, and I'm in a men's group here. There's like, you just imagine like 20 of the most like influential, powerful kind of men who are in the transformational space. I'm in this group, and it's recently started. And we're sharing things on Marco Polo, which if people don't know, it's an app which I wasn't aware of, but you share video clips within your group. So guys will get on there and they'll talk about whatever the topic is, right? And one of the guys asked me, he goes, hey, Cal, I see you also come up as John. Like, what do you prefer to be called? And I answered back and I said, well, I prefer to be called Cal. You know, John's just still like there's a little bit of a trigger for me there with the name. And I kind of went on and on about it. And the beauty of being vulnerable and open and owning that shit, especially in a group full of 20 men who don't let that slide. They're like, oh, so tell me about what the trigger is, right? And so then I had to sit with it. And my wife, who's really attuned to these things, she said, when was it that you stopped being called John or stopped identifying as John? And what's interesting is my varsity letter jacket from high school, I went to public high school for 3 years in Maine. It has my name as John on my letterman jacket. The next year I went away to a private school and my soccer jacket said Booney. My nickname for a couple of years was Booney. But even through high school growing up, my buddies always called me Cal, but girls, teachers, coaches called me John. That started to change when I went away to private school. And what I've identified is when I went away, I didn't want to be looked at as the small town. I had a lot of shame around coming from a small town in Maine, not having any of the resources that all these people had. And I wanted to play a different role. I wanted to be someone different. And so that was the start for me of the shame around that name and that version of myself. That only added to the wounding. And I only became aware of this quite recently. I went away to college, and from that moment on, I introduced myself as Cal, and everybody called me Cal. And it was confusing at times because my name would be John in the program or whatever, but everybody called me Cal. And that was just when I went to Chicago, Cal. My badge, was Kal, because Cal was taken, but Cal was my badge. As I sat with all of this, one of the other brothers had mentioned how he changed his name and he felt a real sense of empowerment from stepping into that new version of himself. And then another brother shared a story, and I forget where the story comes from. I believe it's from Greek mythology, but we're given our name by our mother. We're given our birth name by our mother. And then we step into our true name by we either give it ourselves or by our tribe gives us our new name. And that's kind of the work we're meant to do. So I have all these different perspectives on this one thing for me. And I recognize that I've known that this is a trigger, but I haven't done the work. And so I just started to think about it and own it. And again, a brother shared with me, he's like, look, his whole orientation is just joy. And what I've been doing is I've been noticing that everything I want to do right now is associated with joy. And it wasn't until he and I had a conversation about a week ago that he explained that joy, like the child is driving, okay, whether we like it or not, the child is driving our ship. When that child is wounded, we act that way. Like I said, when my wife would react in a way to me, I would tuck tail and go hide. That's not 49-year-old me. That's the wounded child. If you heal that child is still driving the ship, but they just want to have fun and play, and they're good. They have a good heart. They see the good in people. They don't have to remind themselves that person has a good heart. It's just, I don't have to think about any of that shit anymore. It's just how I see the world. It's truly waking up and seeing the matrix for what it is. My wife and I had what would have been a very challenging conversation yesterday. Would have been one of the hardest ones we've had. I would have dreaded it, fucking dreaded it. I was so excited to it because I knew within the conversation was deep healing for me individually, for her individually, and for our relationship. And we sat in this room, which I'll share with you about that in a minute. We sat in this room for 4 hours and just held space and had really difficult conversations. We were radically honest, right? And so that, again, I'm gonna get a little sidetracked here, but my orientation right now, I don't need to read the books anymore. I'm living radical honesty. I'm living radical acceptance. And those books are useful because when I wasn't there, they helped me understand what's possible and gave me kind of a shining light. Okay, like just keep doing the work. Like use these books as inspiration to keep doing your work.
And a container then too.
Yes. And so the office here, the space, the podcast space, the library, the den, I'm intent on finding a name for it because it has awoken this child in me. And when I think I shared with you, I spent one day, it probably took 12, 14 hours to take all the stuff out of here that wasn't mine and to put all my things in here. And about midway through the day, I went out to the kitchen and told Peyton, I said, I feel like a little kid who gets to decorate his room for the first time. And I didn't know that that's what was happening until the other day. I was like, oh, everything that's bringing me joy is through the lens of a child. And we need to honor that child. We need to love that child. And we need to help heal that child. We need to be there. And when that child is wounded, don't judge yourself for what you've done. Know that there's wounding. That's more information. Just like we said, the triggers, there's more information for you to know that there's more healing to be done and to hold that version, a 7-year-old version, 6-year, whatever the version is of you that is in pain and is feeling that has been given guilt, been given shame by someone else. It's not theirs. And that's what I learned. This is not mine. And I finally gave it back from where it came. And that was, it's all been part of the process.
That's freed up so much energy. There's so much goodness here to unpack with this awakening that you've experienced, and it's not surprising in these times where we're at with all this heavy energy. You know, we can use this. I've been beating this drum all year. We can use this energy to catalyze our next level growth, our quantum leaps, or this energy can fucking bury us. And you know, for you to lean in, and there was so much pragmatic goodness and practical tips too that really hit and resonated with me. You know, with living the 4 agreements, and I think that those who can live those simple 4 agreements that will be, and that's from Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements, which is to be impeccable with your word, to not take anything personal, to not make assumptions, and to always do your best. I think that people who honor those 4 agreements are the ones that are going to be able to move through that digital deluge and just this crazy information overload, to embody that spirit of abundance that you're talking about, and that spirit of joy. And really to kind of box out the outside world, so we can go about and do the work that we're here to do. And you know, your share around your you know, the experience with the you know, John and Cal, and having that realization, and you know, it sounds like there was maybe some heaviness that you had just kind of pushed off, and
there was a fuck ton of it. It was just like,
hey, you know,
bypass, like, get away from me. I don't know you.
Yeah, I'm going to put that over here. I'm busy. It's a go-go world. We don't have time for that. We don't, especially back then when men talking about emotions back in the 80s and 90s, you know, is just something you don't do. And so I honor your leaning in and feeling it and processing that. And I think that there's an immense amount of, you know, you'd freed up that energy, and to unpack your ketamine experiences as well. You know, there is that point where we're, you know, elevated, and we're embodying that elevation. And you know, it takes time. Sometimes it takes time to get used to too, in terms of like sleep patterns, in terms of all that stuff, and reevaluating what works for us now. Just because something worked for us before doesn't mean that it's going to be. I know on my path, there's psychedelics or plant medicines that were medicines before, which, you know, looking at them differently, sometimes medicines turn into poison. So it's something we always have to keep an eye on.
Right.
But you know, I just, you know, again, honor your experiences, and thank you for sharing your truth. And you know, I see that Dalai Lama, you know, in the background here, and I think what we're doing here, we're at the bottom of a rabbit hole around the basis of peace. And I know we talked in part 1 on this episode of this, I believe we're going to see a peaceful planet in this next generation. And this is the beginning of the collective ego, the kind of the madness that we're feeling right now, is that resistance to change. And it doesn't want to change, but we have these exponential technologies, accelerated technologies that are rapidly changing our world. I talked about that a lot with Stephen Kotler on Worth the Fight podcast number 15. And these technologies, they have sharp fucking blades. So, you know, the bullshit incorporated, these structures that don't serve the best interest of the people, I think are poised to fall apart in the next few months, next few years, next decade, next few decades, so we can make way for Dalai Lama's peaceful planet.
Yes, yes. And I would just offer for people too, like, don't feel like don't rush to embodying stuff like the 4 agreements. Continue to work with it, read it. Like, I've read it several times over the last 4 or 5 years. And just stay in the inquiry, and be kind to yourself. You're doing the best you can. And you've got to look at when you act in ways that you're not proud of, like, that's your younger wounded version. And you need to like it just find a picture of yourself, put it on an altar, put it somewhere where you like that joyous, child, and just know that they didn't deserve any of that wounding, but that's where they're at, and they need to be loved just like you would love any other child that was feeling that way. So that's my invitation to everyone.
Beautiful. Yes. Love that. I want to hit on, I want to be respectful of your time, but this notion of abundance. And you had the beautiful opportunity of being in your home, and you have one of the most beautiful homes I've ever seen. There's so much love in it. You got a pet pig, you got dogs, and it's just like whoa, this fucking next level, and
It's fun.
it's
Yeah.
a compound to play in. And I got that impression. And we talked about it a little bit on the pre-call, and you'd mentioned that, and I would imagine this goes to your trader days of having feeling that the kind of the angst or the shame or the guilt around abundance, and right now you're in a position to have all this clarity, and you have material blessings, and to be of service to, I mean, money still drives our world, so I'm trying to formulate a question here to unpack, because there's so much scarcity in scarcity programs, limiting belief, bullshit incorporated scarcity programs in the psychedelic renaissance, in the spiritual communities, in our collective awakening. Maybe unpack some learnings around coming to peace with this abundance, and using it to serve and to help.
Well, what I would say is, we all, like, think about when you're in flow. For all the listeners, think about when you're in flow and you're just doing your thing. Like, whatever is happening around that's like your superpower. Okay. Or that's a superpower for you. We're not always in that state, right? So when we're not in that state, what is keeping us from being in that state? And those are the things that need to be healed. But that is an insight into your superpower and what you do really well. Now, for me, again, as a trader, one of the things that made me a really good trader is I could lose money and just know I was going to make it back. I didn't feel like, oh, fuck, we just lost 500 grand, on this really bad bet. Like, how are we ever going to make it back? Yeah, there were times where I was like super bummed about it, but like, I just knew, like, I knew I could just, and again, I didn't know that it was an abundant mindset, but that's what it looked like for me during that experience. When I would share trades, as I was saying before, like, not a lot of guys did that. They wouldn't share trades with their competition. But for me, it's just like, I just know there's more than enough to go around, and I'm good. And I just never felt like, it's not like I want to fucking lose everything, but if I did, I know I could just do whatever to make everything back. And I've always, just with my time, I look around, everyone's fucking so stressed. They don't have time to do anything they want to do. I've never had that mindset. I fucking do the shit I want to do. Like, that's another, kind of idea around abundance. There can be a shadow side to that. Sometimes it's without any, taking into account how it impacts everybody else. It's not being true. There's like that shadow side of it. So that's not good. That's not serving the greater good. But when done right, like just doing those things, and I went away to LA for a night last week. Most people don't do that. I'm like, I wanted to see these guys. I didn't want to go for the whole weekend. I wanted to get in, get out. And the first 12 hours was like, we packed in like a month's worth of like connecting in 12 hours. And so it's just like, don't, like, the can'ts and like, that's the shit that's stopping you. So open up your aperture. Like, when you do that, what becomes available to you? And for me, like I said, I always had this sense of abundance. I always had the resources. And again, we didn't grow up with much, but I went, I got into the best small college in the country when I went to college. I went to Amherst College. At that time, it was the #1 school in U.S. News and World Report, which was the thing everybody looked at. I was pretty good in school, but how the fuck did I get in there? Yeah, I played hockey, but like, but I got in there, you know? So I just could make things happen because I just believed in it in some level. Like, yeah, why wouldn't I go there? My best friend's going there. I'll go there too. And, you know, now the way it shows up in my life is, you know, I've just launched this new thing called Unlearn Ventures. And it's something where I'm taking my love of investing, you know, because I do have financial resources and I enjoy supporting people in their mission. And it was always a passive investment. So I'd always write a check to the thing and just hope it did well. Now, the first question is, will this bring me joy? Will being in partnership, now it's a partnership for me, being in partnership with this company that's looking for a first investor, will it bring me joy? Do I connect with the founder, with what his vision is? Yes. Okay. Now let's start to do a little due diligence. And then at a certain point, I'm not married to it. Like, I don't need to do any of it. There's no sense of scarcity or FOMO, like the next thing that blows up. I don't fucking care about that. I want to know that everything I invest in now is fun and brings me joy, because I know when I do that, I follow that North Star, the money doesn't matter, but I know it's going to take care of itself, and it's just fun. And then again, that's just that child that my version of the child who just looked at like he could do anything he wanted. He didn't care. He'd play sports. He would try things. He just didn't care. He wasn't constricted. And so I'm letting him play. And it's been so fun and energizing that I truly have an infinite source of energy and excitement and joy. And it's just, it's what's, you know, and the thing, you know, I'm not going to make any assumptions about how I'm coming across today, but I'll be very clear that I'm so grounded in the work I'm doing right now, because as much energy, when people generally bring out this much energy, it's like, ooh, they're really fucking kind of losing it a little bit. They're like, really, what are they on? Or I'm not on anything. I'm not saying I'm high on life. That's kind of corny, but I'll say that I'm very grounded in very fucking clear in the work I'm here to do. And I'm really excited about it. I see stuff unfolding, but I'm not worried about how it's going to unfold, because I'm so fucking excited about every minute I'm alive right now. It's why I can't sleep. So maybe that answers it.
Oh, it does. It does. In the most beautiful of fashions. Yeah. I honor you, brother. Thank you for this time. So much goodness and high vibe, pragmatic ideas, you know, from the get-go in our conversation that people can use to elevate and level up their game. We're meeting our present times exactly where our present times are at. Thank you for going out to that edge in your work. Please, everyone, give a listen to the Great Unlearn podcast. Cal's got a bunch of amazing episodes, evergreen episodes. That episode with Preston Smiles was really hard hitting for me, and that was the best. I keep a very close eye on Aubrey Marcus, and that was the best interview that I've heard him. And you brought out so much goodness out of him. I want to tell you a little fun fact here. My mentor, Akshay Nanavati, who wrote the book Firvana, which was endorsed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, was on Aubrey's podcast. And it was Akshay going into the 7-day darkness retreat in Germany that gave Aubrey that idea. And Aubrey had that big insight about his hurts and his where he was going wrong with Whitney, and he got the clarity, which ultimately led to this true love journey that he's on with Vilana, and so it's kind of, you know, see the synchronicities there, but yeah, take a listen to the podcast, and I'm really excited to hear about more goodness coming forth. I think that this Unlearn Ventures there's immense opportunity right now, and everything you're saying is sound and really inspiring to me as I'm earnestly seeking to embody that spirit of abundance and prosperity, and have been working through my challenges. So much love to you, brothers. Thank you so much for taking this time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, brother.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, where can people find you?
Best place is Instagram, cal.callahan. And we had spoken before about the men's stuff that I was doing. That's actually coming to a close. I realized that that's not my work anymore.
Really?
Yeah. That was again, another thing I set up for myself unknowingly. Like, it came in with certain intentions of like bringing men together, curating experiences with the mentors that I've had, for them to have an experience and for them to kind of learn from that. I just finished this. I'm finishing the second one up tomorrow, and I had an awareness a couple of weeks ago that it's like, oh, it's time to shut it down. There's no Unlearned Brotherhood. It was my way to hold space for men over, as you know, in Zoom is really challenging, but I got really good at it. And it's like, oh, I'm not meant to do this work anymore. I'm meant to really stand out in this community in Austin as a leader, and then much, much bigger than that. So I need to focus my energy and empower those men that have been through that. And I've told them, I said, now the invitation to you is to take what you've learned and start your own tribes and start your own brotherhoods and share that, because my work was to do that for you as part of my work. But now I'm called to other stuff. And again, what I love about it is it's super successful. It's changing lives. I love all the experts I brought in that I've worked with. They're amazing. The brotherhood is super tight. Why would you ever stop that, man? It's successful. You make money from it. It's like, because it's not my work to do anymore. That chapter's closed, and it served its purpose. It was my school to know how to show up and listen and hold space. And now it's time to move on.
Beautiful, beautiful. I admire that, seeing that clearly, and we only have 24 hours in the day. We only have so much energetic bandwidth to give. And if there's a more direct, succinct, clear path moving forward, hey, honor the chapter. And I'm sure that those two sessions that you had, or those two programs, I think they were 8-week programs, have helped a lot of people. And now you're in a position, you've grown your tribe. You have a tribe in Austin, and Austin is the place where shit is getting done in our collective awakening. So, nothing but love to you, and excitement for the work that you're here to do, and looking forward to the next one, brother.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on today, brother.
Sure. Wow, that was a lot of fun for me having that conversation with Cal Callahan, the host of the Great Unlearn podcast. He is a brother on the path, a man on fire. Please check out his work. Links are in the show notes, and ways to connect with Cal. And he's got loads of evergreen podcasts. Let's all keep an eye on his inspiring work that he's doing for our human family. I truly admire that spirit of curiosity that Cal brings to the table. He questions everything, and bringing a lot of guests on his podcast that might not have a message that aligns with the mainstream cultural narrative. And I think it's very brave of him to showcase some of these contrarian thinkers. And freedom of speech is a foundational tenet of being an American. And it was such a pleasure having both conversations with Cal, and hope that you enjoyed our spirited conversation, pushing the edges. If you are loving our content, please consider leaving a 5-star iTunes review. These iTunes reviews help us garner favor with the search algorithm, so we can serve more people, get our message of hope and healing, the Worth the Fight mission and message of hope and healing out to more people. This is a not-for-profit service project, and we'd absolutely love your support by way of a review. And yeah, I'm here for y'all. It's we are in some precarious times, some unprecedented, uncertain times, and I am here as a resource. Again, this is a service project, and I am here with earnest intentions to put out content to help us all level up our games, level up our lives, level up our service offerings, so that we can put our best foot forward in these these precarious times. DM me. Feel free to reach out. I'm here for all of you. And again, so much love and gratitude for the support as we keep pushing the Worth the Fight mission out into the unknown. Much love, y'all. Peace. I am thrilled to share with all of you. I have a few spaces left in my Worthy Fight one-on-one empowerment coaching. I've garnered much clarity these past many months in regards to my life purpose. I'm here to guide and support the next generation of next-level changemakers in the psychedelic renaissance and beyond. Who is my one-on-one coaching for? People with bold, conscious ideas, or an inkling that there is a much greater expression trying to emerge. People who believe in a better, more equitable world and aren't afraid to back up that belief with action. People who want to genuinely serve others and our collective awakening at a higher capacity. We aren't meant to do this alone, and coaching helps us move through obstacles and challenges more efficiently. Together, we lean in and walk through the fire of transformation on the path to you owning your greater role and bigger purpose in this movement. There are a lot of things that I don't know, but when it comes to transformation and matters of the spirit, I am battle tested and hold this space and duty as sacred. If this activates something within, reach out. Again, I have a few spaces left. Time has gotten very tight for me with the Worth the Fight mission and message of hope and healing heating up, but I can take on 1 or 2 more clients. So much love to all of you. Peace.